for being here, and thank you, panelists, for taking the time of your busy schedule and being able to perhaps address some of the questions. It's interesting that we had two talks previously to this one, and it's interesting that we scheduled this panel to help the audience make sense of what has been said. So far, we talked about investment. That was the second tech talk. And the first one was about technology. So let's say techies and investors have been talking to each other, and in between, we were lost. So our friends here, the panelists, are going to help us to make sense of this conversation and this discussion and help us understand how this technology connect, first of all, to communities, connect to economy, and connect to government services and government work. I'm going to start, first of all, with my friend Mark on my right. If we can give the audience an overview of the state of blockchain, outside, obviously, of crypto. Where is blockchain and what's happening in the world?
Sure. So
Sorry, introduce yourself. I forgot to do that.
First things first. Okay, so my name is Mark. I'm a partner at Accelerators, and Accelerators is a catalyst for innovation. We work with corporates and governments to understand emerging technologies, understand how to formulate their engagement strategy with those technologies, and how to integrate those within their organizations. And of course, a big part of that entails working with startups, working with new initiatives, and understanding how to adjust and adapt to those new technologies, both within the organization and within the underlying culture and mindset. So we've done a lot of projects in blockchain, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. So with that said, we started engaging in the blockchain space in 2015 in the enterprise sense, working with European banks on formulating their engagement strategies. Since then, we've seen an explosion in interest, primarily driven by, of course, the cryptocurrency bubble, but also in realizing the underlying value of blockchain. We've seen initiatives all around the world, both at the government level and policy making, and initiatives like the Dubai blockchain strategy and the UAE blockchain strategy. And we've seen lots of maturity of some of these initiatives, applications, technologies, and people are coming back to the basics, I think, Sid. So we've had huge spike of interest, lots of investment, lots of fallout, and what that fallout has left us with are concrete use cases, concrete technologies that are becoming increasingly standardized, and a global environment that's much more aware of what blockchain is and what to do with it.
Let me actually take it from here. So we have at least now some use cases about what is it that you can do and what is that you cannot do. So let me actually get the question to our friends from Dubai Foundation. If you could simply tell us or tell the audience about why it is important to get engaged in these technologies. What is it that for the community, for the government, for the society to be engaged in these exponential technologies?
Okay, well, first off, Assalamu alaikum. My name is Mariam, and I lead the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution at the Dubai Future Foundation. Just to give you a little background on the center before I answer Sid's question, the center is a collaboration between the Dubai Future Foundation and the World Economic Forum. So a lot of the questions that we talk about when we look at blockchain, and particularly the governance around blockchain, is both on a global and local scale. So we work with the World Economic Forum to develop global frameworks and global policies, but then we ensure that each of these policies are really tailored to the discussions we're having here in the UAE. So as Mark mentioned, we have both the Dubai blockchain strategy and the federal blockchain strategy. And these are really key to the work that we're doing within policy to ensure that we can make sure all of this is implemented effectively and responsibly. So I think to your question, Sid, and I allow Karin to speak more to kind of the ecosystem building, but from a governance perspective, what we're seeing globally is, the same questions that we're seeing locally. We're seeing questions of data privacy, of compliance, of whether, who owns the data, who do we give the data to if we're working with a private sector company as public sector. And I think these are really key questions that we as the government need to address, but what's really important about the work that we do at the foundation is that we work with all of the stakeholders in the field, so both public and private sector, as well as solution providers, to ensure that we really are approaching it from a multi-stakeholder approach, to ensure that we're answering the questions that the private sector need us to answer as the government, but that we are also driving that from a policy and kind of regulatory perspective. And perhaps, Karin, you can tell the audience a bit more about Area 2071 and the accelerators.
My name is Karin. I lead Dubai Future Accelerators and the program in Area 2071 as part of Dubai Future Foundation. And the goal of Dubai Future Foundation is to turn Dubai in one of the leading cities for the future. And because when we talk about the future, it's a very complex concept, we need to bring in people with different mindsets and different experiences. So we cannot only work in silos. We can't just work as a government, especially when it comes to emerging technologies, right? Our goal is to connect solution providers, and in most cases, those are actually startups. We connect the government, of course, and private sector organization. And just next door, so I invite you all, if you haven't been to our ecosystem yet, we have set up an ecosystem called Area 2071. And I guess most of you will know why it's called Area 2071, because in 2071, the UAE will celebrate 100 years of its existence. And what we have seen very interestingly, when we hosted about 2 months ago a program with the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution, where we brought in solution providers, government entities, and private sector organizations who already have identified use cases for blockchain or in the process of doing so. The immense appetite of collaboration, of really sharing. And what we also have seen is, I think, what has helped us to identify our role in this. So we are seeing ourselves as facilitators of these collaborations. And we realize, especially blockchain, it's not just being applied within one organization, but it's about cross organizations, cross industries, and then also cross borders.
Very good, wonderful. I think the reason we are here in Dubai, in UAE, because the political leadership in this country has understood very, very well the importance of investing into exponential technologies or transformational technologies. And I think Dubai Custom has done some very good work already on blockchain. So it would be good if we can have some examples on indication on where you are in terms of implementing this technology.
Thank you for everybody. My name is Hussain Fardan. I'm the head of innovation Dubai Custom. You conclude your talk by saying that our leaders, they always want to be ahead of almost all nations. Okay, the latest technology in the world, they always try to bring the latest technology in the world. Dubai Custom, thanks God, started very early because we deal with all customs around the world. We have to adopt their changes also. We started with the World Custom Organizations, a few initiatives because I'm the head of innovation. For example, the virtual corridor in the Dubai Customs is one of the initiatives that it's already can be linked to a worldwide blockchain and started from Dubai. The idea came from Dubai. And also we have Aya, which is, I worked on it right now. It's a future also blockchain system. It will link all the investors in UAE to make sure the new investors who wants to invest in Dubai, they don't need to go through a third party or middle people. They can just open their mobiles, see the lands, see the investments in Dubai, do their own investing without having the third parties and very clear to all the knowledge will be shared very smoothly. And also for the smart cities, Dubai already is a smart city, okay? And we are going to this also vision from the sheikhs. We have to link all the data and we have to link all our initiatives together so we don't duplicate efforts.
Very good. Of course, we cannot complete this first round in conversation on the state or the global state of blockchain without talking about Philippines. Philippines has done actually an excellent work in terms of welcoming that technology. And Mike, I think you lead an organization that helps startups and entrepreneurs to get involved in transformational technologies. Do you mind sharing with us your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you, Sid. My name is Mike David. I'm a lawyer and a CPA by profession. I'm currently the head Fintech and VC Exchange Business Officer in the Cagayan Economic Zone Authority. Just a briefer on what the Cagayan Economic Zone Authority is, or Ceza. We are an office established through a legislative charter under the Office of the President. So we directly report to the Office of the President with regard to the zone we established in the northernmost part of the Philippines, which we can house innovative industries such as blockchain, fintech, and VC exchanges, where our rules that we issued last year provide us the power, the authority to issue licenses, business licenses to offshore companies where they can open businesses in the Philippines, and the Philippines in return can give fiscal benefits such as tax benefits, marketing strategies, and other assistance we can give through our local partners such as Rare Earth Asia Technologies. So we can even further help not only the businesses but also the region in educating the public and also promoting the business that they have.
Very good. Let me actually now move to my second set of questions. But before I do that, I want to invite the audience to help us also in asking questions. We don't want simply to have a monologue, but we want to have actually a dialogue where we can actually exchange information. So if you have any questions or comments to add to enrich this conversation, please let me know and we will give you a mic. Let me try to reframe this question. I think the business proposition of a blockchain technology, we can summarize it in two ideas. Number one is to remove intermediaries. That's what we call the disintermediation, if you will, of the business relationship. That's number one. And number two is to lower the cost and create more efficiencies in your system. From your views as experts of this technology and expert in business, how this technology is going to deliver on that promise? Because we have seen a lot of hype, a lot of discussion on the financial system, in the fintech, in the crypto. But if we move to other sectors, education, healthcare, and other things, or commerce, as you said it, sir, how do you see the contribution of a blockchain in these two elements or others? Mark, you want to start with this?
Yeah, sure. So from an applications perspective, we did some work recently with Smart Dubai, and we basically look at blockchain in three areas. Blockchain can be used for records and data notarization, and that relates quite well to the cost and process optimization you're referring to. It can be used for value exchange, so with the digital asset conversation that's going on, as well as clearing, settlement, and other use cases in the financial industry. And lastly, it can be used for smart contracts, such as automating certain business logic through smart contracts on the blockchain. So with that said, there are many, many applications beyond the financial industry. Of course, the financial industry sparked the initial interest in blockchain, but when you look at those 3 points, you can find applications everywhere, from validating where my academic background comes from, who issued my diplomas, who issued my certifications, and are they legitimate. We eliminate the need for relying on paper as a means to validate people's academic and professional backgrounds. In the same way, you can use blockchain to track goods moving through a supply chain and apply those different fundamental principles to any part of business, whether it's healthcare, whether it's education, and supply chain, and so forth. So I think my colleagues here as well have some experience in that side, from the policy making as well as the practical implementation. So I'd like to pass it off to them for that.
Sure, yeah. Mariam, what's your take on this delivered value of blockchain?
Absolutely, thank you. Thank you, Mark. I think what Karin alluded to earlier with the Accelerator program that we were working on with a number of private sector and public sector companies was we were really looking at different use cases of blockchain and kind of the benefits of them. So we were looking at, for example, blockchain use for counterfeit goods, being able to track a good from the factory to the actual store. And there are a number of big brands that have this issue and are now utilizing blockchain for that. As well as Mark alluded to, the supply chain. So, for example, all of the food that you eat, what if some of that stuff, when it's coming on shipping containers or coming, via transport or plane, is actually rotted, right? This is something that we're also looking at, and the use of kind of IoT within that. But I think what we try to do, I think more from a policy perspective, just because that's what we do at the foundation within the center, is figure out what the challenges are when that technology is applied, and then actually help from that perspective. So for example, if in a supply chain, the biggest hindrance is that there aren't enough stakeholders at the table to ensure that that supply chain is transparent and efficient, we are, as both the accelerator and as the foundation, we put together a framework that can help solve that challenge. And then we actually give it to those particular entities and we say, okay, maybe what you're missing is an incentive to bring all those stakeholders to the table. How about a financial incentive or just a global, public good incentive? And then from that, they utilize that framework and they come back to us and they say, yes, actually, once we put these incentives at the table, people did come. We did get more stakeholders. And we continue that process. So it's an iterative process and a creative process to ensure that the policies that we're putting forward really do benefit the consumers and the end users of the technology.
I just have to think back to the 3 points you mentioned earlier, and a couple of years ago, I think when at the peak of the blockchain craze, it seemed like blockchain is the answer to all of our challenges, and every company was looking into how can we implement blockchains in many areas as possible. But I think this has settled a bit, and now we're really looking at where does it make sense, what are the use cases, and what we have seen in Dubai Future Accelerators, for example, is using blockchain between a bank and a telco provider. So if I am paying my telco bill on a bank through a bank account, it usually took them 30 to 45 days to reconcile their payments. Now with blockchain, it's actually instantly. We have also seen blockchain, of course, using in the field of education when it comes to the university records. Because if I ask you now, where is your university certificate, I'm pretty sure you're going to tell me in a folder somewhere. And I know that some people, especially those who have traveled and moved across countries, first of all, the certificate doesn't look that nice anymore, and they have had the pain of going through getting it translated and accredited. So again, increasing the efficiency in this field. As well as, of course, what's very interesting now, we are in talks with a local retail company, and they are looking into really forming a consortium and trying to see how can they leverage blockchain to just avoid the fact that they lose a lot of money through current processes because they're very complex. And they're looking into forming a consortium with other government entities and private sector organizations to, again, increase efficiency. Yeah.
Very good. I want to get your take, Mike. What do you see from your side, from Philippines, in terms of other usage or other applications for this new emerging technology?
Yes, especially from us, from the regulators. What we did was we took a step back. We see that there are 2 key things that is being answered by blockchain. First, it's trust and time. First, with time, we see that with blockchain, we can have thousands to even millions of transactions done in a single second. And that translates to efficiency and cost of anything, of cost of processing and everything for us. Second is trust. When it comes to trust, especially for us as a third world country and a place where there's always typhoons and all of these disasters, it is a very helpful thing for us to maximize since, let's say, for our record keepings, for government records, for land titles, health records, university records. It is very important for us as it not only maximizes our potential to process it faster, but to also make sure that the records are immutable. And this translates, for the longer picture, more savings and less hassle for our citizens, our residents. And from the government, we aim to support these by giving sandbox regulations to them and talking to the consumers themselves on how we can further close the gap. And as we say, we disrupt and we decentralize the whole process, but with a good governance hanging over it, just to make sure that things are kept in pace.
Very good. Mr. Fardan, I think you should have a very good example with those zillions of containers that you have in Jabal Ali. So how does blockchain help you in managing that?
In the containers field, it's very easy because the containers weight around 20 tons. Okay, but I will talk about more about the social media. For example, it's affecting our economy. Okay, because of rumors. Especially in Dubai, there's a lot of ice in Dubai going. And in 2018, we came up with the Innovation Mondial to solve few challenges that not only Dubai Custom, that also Dubai is facing. And we discovered that lots of investors in Dubai, they are leaving because of rumors, not because of real problems in Dubai. And the social media, we discovered that something is good, but at the same time, also there is a lot of challenges. So we came up with the idea that all the group were talking about, which is, I spoke about it earlier, it's called IAM. It's Artificial Intelligence Innovation Application, or Investors Application, sorry. This application can make sure people who want to invest in Dubai, for example, while in their country, they can view the hotspots, they can see the fees, the hidden fees of Dubai before even they come to Dubai. And they don't need to ask the taxi driver or to ask anybody in Dubai, where can I invest, or where is the good spot to invest. All of these middle people can affect the business and the economy in Dubai. So we come up with this application, and I think it's from next year we'll start working on it to make sure every investor has this application for free. And also we link it to a cryptocurrency for rewarding for people who will give us more ideas in the future for startup ideas, for example, to enhance this application.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Fardan, for mentioning this again, because it's a good example, if you will, of how an innovative system can be enhanced through these different applications and technology. The last tech talk, Cube, is he in the audience, the gentleman who presented? If he or someone from Cube, I think the idea I get from the conversation he mentioned is that in terms of security and safety and the cybersecurity aspect, if you will, of blockchain, I think he mentioned that there are already some hackers moving into, if you will, quantum computing, and that could be in itself a danger for most of us, but also it could be an opportunity for blockchain. So wondering if you can address this question, the connection, if you will, between cybersecurity and a blockchain. Are we in a stage where we can say, well, this is a technology that is going to be relatively unhackable and safe for us because you have all your records, you have everything, or it's simply one of these technologies? Mark, you want to address it?
Sure. So, I mean, the thing with blockchain is that very often people talk about benefits of blockchain. What does blockchain do? Security, transparency, and so forth. But what does security actually mean? Right? What does transparency actually mean? And delving into are we talking about encryption? Are we talking about database security? Are we talking about permissions and access? This will make answering some of those questions a lot easier. But with regard to the recent news about quantum computing, I think that was Google that had made the announcement. I think the jury is still out on what kind of impact that will have. There's been many influential stakeholders in the crypto community that have said, no, this isn't relevant to what we're talking about with public blockchains. But at the same time, quantum computing is a very real concern, not just for blockchain, but for cryptography in general. And so this is something that has to be considered very closely as people continue to engage in blockchain in the near future.
Let me ask our futurist, any ideas, any thought on how this technology is being talked about in your Dubai Foundation?
I mean, with every emerging technologies, right, we also have to look into
True.
how vulnerable is the technology.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to have conversations among policymakers, but then also the developers, usually as said, startups and scale-ups and private sector organization, to really understand what do we need to look at and what do we need to explore moving forward. I mean, I don't think anybody can predict what's going to happen in that field, but with every technology, right, it can always be applied in a good way, but also in a harmful way. And I think just have to have an open conversation around that.
The reason I raised up this issue, because it happens a lot in blockchain as well as in artificial intelligence, that average common citizen would probably hear about this technology through negative news rather than through positive news. In other words, we may wake up on AI controlling all our systems and attacking all our systems, and that's where common, again, citizen, common person would hear about what AI means. I mean, this is an audience of experts, so everybody knows what we are talking about. But the average person in the street, that's something probably unknown. And that's why I raised this question. Mike, what's your take on this?
Yeah, again, on the side of the regulator, people will always ask me, what's the point of approaching a regulator? Why get a license? But what we do is, before we actually grant a license, we require our applicants to submit and to undergo our strict process of checking their KYC procedures, AML policies, counter-terrorist financing, cybersecurity details, and all of these policies to make sure that all of their operations are intact and their systems are well protected. And in fact, we even add a deeper layer to that, wherein as our licensees, we require them to be connected to our local data provider. That will ensure that there's proper geofencing, there are proper systems in place to make sure that there's a secondary layer of security for them. And just stepping back out of the regulation on this side, what we do see is that since there's a big deal with data privacy and cybersecurity, we also, as the government, we also tap other agencies and departments from our government to help us out and to see that we are intact with and we're in par with global standards. So I think that is the value of approaching and also regulating this whole sphere at least for this time.
Very good. Thank you actually for mentioning the concept of a global standard. There are a lot of technologies that are emerging that unfortunately still are not only regulated, but also there is no reference for them, there is no standard for them. I have been working with the US delegation at ISO for the last 4 years to develop a standard for what we mean by innovation management system. And there is another group working on AI, what it means to have an AI. There's another group at ISO in the US working also on the governance of AI and ethics. And it takes very, very long time actually to go through these processes because you have to go through a consensus of different members. So at least when you have a standard, you have a benchmark, you have a reference that helps you as a manager or business owner on how you can lead. I think I have about 10 minutes for this panel. And I want to try to engage the audience, and I think the best way to engage it is through my visual. Do you mind getting my slide on the podium? This is something that you probably have seen before or you have studied in your business classes. Is about what we call the acceptance of technology. When does a market, a group of people, a community accept a technology and welcome technology? And it's called in technical term crossing the chasm, which is again has been talked about in a lot of places. It helps if the audience to look at this visual. And the question I have for the audience, but also I have for my panelists, where do you think we are in terms of blockchain? And it's divided basically into 3 parts. You've got the early market. The first 2 ones are the people that you see outside. These are the people who have booth. They have been already innovators. They are early adopters. They are already there. And the challenge for you as an entrepreneur, as an innovator, as someone who come up with a new technology is how can you jump from early market to mainstream market? That's what we call the mainstreaming of technology. So crossing that chasm, crossing that huge differences, that's basically where the challenge. So my question to my panelists, based on your own experience, where do you see blockchain is? That's question number 1. But question number 2 is what does a government need to do to help actually people move from early market to mainstream market? Mariam, you want to take this question?
So I would say probably between, and Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, I would say probably between 2 and 3. And in terms of the government side, I think it's twofold question, right? So
yes.
There needs to be a push and a drive, and I think what's very interesting about the UAE is that with the adoption of technology, it's primarily come first from the public sector, and so the investment's already been there. And so what we've done, and that's what the Accelerator program is too, is it's opened up kind of an ecosystem that's been invested in heavily already by the government to startups. And so that ecosystem that may perhaps in other places needs to be developed developed by the private sector has already been kind of put in place by the public sector here. And so I think that it was a very important step to really grow the technology and the innovation. But I think secondary, and that's kind of where we step in as the center, is that yes, there was this push that was for investment, and this came from the public sector. But once the private sector are here, you see where the challenges start to arise, right? You see where we've kind of stopped moving from like adoption into a major adoption, let's say. And that's where you have these issues of stakeholder incentives, you have these issues of compliance and data privacy, and those are bigger, I think, discussions that have to be done across both private and public sector, because if you don't trust the private sector entity that you're working with or the solution provider that you're working with, you're never going to get past the early adoption phase, right? And so that's where we work with these kind of governance frameworks to ensure that we really are understanding what the challenges are and why people are not adopting it maybe as quickly and as efficiently as we'd like them to as the government, and what we can do to really support that.
Very good. Karin, you want to address this?
I think just to add to what Mariam said, what we realize now as well, especially working with the private sector, is when it comes to the C-level executives, since this emerging technologies are not something that they have learned in their business school or in their experience, right? It's a new topic. Education is very important, and really understanding what can be the potential business impact or the impact on their industry. And then also looking into, well, internally, what kind of frameworks do I have to set up? So if we approach the implementation of blockchain, who needs to sit on the table? What questions do I need to ask? How do I even evaluate a blockchain solution provider? And if we go into AI, it's even more complex with the ethics questions, right? So I think the education is very important, and then the sharing of the use cases. And this has been, to me personally, a big surprise, seeing that we have really senior managers working in different industries, sometimes even with competitors, openly and to collaborate and share what they have learned and learning from each other. Yeah.
Very good. Mike, what do you think from your point of view, at least in the region where you are, in terms of the mainstreaming of this technology, and what does a government need to do to help in that?
Yeah, I share the view of Mariam here, where we're at the middle of number 2 and 3. So I'm looking at an analogy here. The job of the government is to create a bridge between those two gaps, on top of the chasm. And I think two of the best vehicles to cross that bridge with is two things. First, education and incentives. On our side, it's always a problem with education. People who do not know anything about something, there's two tendencies: fear it or hate it. So what we do is we remove fear and hate by educating the people through media and through other public means, for them to know that this technology is not something that you should fear. It's not about scams, not about any data privacy issues, but it is something that you can actually use towards pushing for the future and what is going to be very useful on your side. Second is on the incentive side, wherein you must develop programs. The government should develop programs on some sort of a regulatory sandbox perspective, wherein businessmen could come easily to the government and help the government form policies that are not so strict, but are not so soft, but so enough to enhance what blockchain really is about, and that is about decentralization. So it's about balance between these factors.
Very good. I think that's the question you mentioned, Mr. Badran, when you talked about informing, educating, and making the awareness, and sometimes the barriers that you have to run. You talked about social media, and you talked about issues that sometimes are not true, but also are happening.
Thanks God to our government also. They always ahead of other governments when it comes to technology. And every time there is a new technology, maybe the first place on earth to hear about it in Dubai, because Sheikh Mohammed is always ahead of so many countries. And this is what I like about my job also in innovation, that every day we are in a different challenge, a different area, and we have to keep up with the changes. When I go to Europe, for example, or America, or the big countries, when I look at their systems in the government sector, we are ahead of them big time, okay? And thanks God to our leaders. For example, Dubai Airport, in few days, you'll see people entering Dubai without any check. You just walk from the aircraft to outside the airport.
With a smile, of course.
Yes, with a smile. And when I go, for example, in Europe and I see the queue, and I was like, it's impossible that to see an Arabic city is more advanced than big, huge cities in Europe or in America. And this is where I realized that thanks to our leaders, they always want us to be ahead of all nations. And that's why also as a head of innovation, Dubai Custom, most of the ideas that from normal people, from the employees, they are really ahead of their time even. They are talking about blockchain, AI, and now the AI is something like every day I hear in Dubai Custom, which is it's a government at the end of the day, but still we are even competing with the private sector.
Very good. I think that's what is interesting about the UAE government and Dubai government particularly, is that the government is changing the service or the way it's being done. By the way, in December 7th and 8th, we will be having actually a government summit in Abu Dhabi it's called Digital Next. This is one of the most important events in terms of digital and emerging technologies, and I invite all of you to come and see us in Abu Dhabi. It's actually a great event. Business leaders, entrepreneurs, decision makers all meet to talk and chat about what's the future of technology. So put it on your calendar. Mark, you take the last question. Again, the chasm, so where are we? And what do you do to help people accept this technology?
Yeah, this chart is really interesting for me because I think one of the two biggest trends now that we can see in blockchain globally is one, communication, and two, arbitrage. So the thing is that, like we were discussing with the UAE, certain governments and certain corporates and other organizations have a particular propensity for innovating, for being at the very beginning there in the innovator category. And by doing this, they experiment, they fail fast, and they get products to market faster. And when I look back at, say, Canada, where we talk with the government year after year after year, it's going nowhere, right? And they're actually just getting to the stage that Dubai was at, for example, in 2016. So you have a lot of this information asymmetry with regards to the chasm. I would say there are many applications actually that are already in the early majority to late majority that are already in the process of being scaled, but there's no consistency across the board, and that's where this arbitrage of know-how, of capabilities is starting to have a major role to play in terms of how we can help spread and scale this technology. So how to cross the chasm, that is a difficult question. It's always a question of when do we want standards, when do we want regulation, and it's sort of like catching a falling knife, for lack of a better metaphor. It's always going to be unpleasant, it's always going to be difficult, but it's also challenging to say when exactly you should come in and start talking about standards and start talking about regulations, because it's easy to see positive effects of those two actions, but the hidden effects of that, like stifling innovation perhaps, are sometimes harder to spot than the positive results. So definitely government has a hand to play, and I think especially the governments like Dubai, like the UAE, who've already gone through that experience, now have the opportunity to share that experience with the rest of the world, and that's what's going to help us catch up and bridge that chasm, at least on the global scale, on the macro perspective.
And that's why we have Dubai Foundation, who are actually thinking ahead of everybody else, 2071, which is actually a big time horizon. Got 2 minutes left, so this is your chance, audience, to ask these experts. But we want to just get your feel on this theory. Do you think blockchain has matured enough that we're able to move everybody, the average citizen in the street, or it's something that we still have to struggle with? And I think I see already a question here. If you could just introduce yourself and then quickly ask the question.
Assalamu alaikum.
Salam.
My name is Fardan. I'm an associate director in Lead Ventures, the Office of His Highness. I'm no expert in blockchain, but from what I hear, I meet a lot of people and I talk to a lot of people about it, and I've always in the process of educating myself, of course, on the blockchain, and you always hear something new about it. And I totally agree with the panelists. It's a fantastic panel, by the way, very informative. I totally agree with him that, especially with Mr. Fardan, it always starts with a rumor about it, right? Someone has to say something negative about it that kind of takes me away from the positivity of it. And then someone comes back and says, no, 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 come to the other side. It's actually good for those benefits. But from what I see and what I feel, I think I totally agree with the panelists. It's in between stage 2 and 3, right? And it's obviously the government's job now and push to move it from one stage to the other and then let it go and let it flow in the market, right? And I think that could be done through compliance and regulations and benchmarking, just like you said. Because otherwise everyone's going to put their own standards and walk on it, right? And that's going to be a big mess. Creating a trust between the public and the private sector is absolutely essential. And if that trust exists, I think we're already on the right track. The question that I have is actually a question that I usually ask any blockchain expert. It's kind of funny, but it's very interesting to me because it always gives me a nice, different view of the blockchain. Whenever I meet a blockchain expert, I usually ask, how would you describe the blockchain technology in one sentence to a 10-year-old kid?
All right, so
and the
that's
answers
your
are always
challenge.
very interesting.
Yeah, that's your challenge. So how would you explain blockchain to a 10-year-old in one sentence, in a simple sentence?
I'm very sorry if that was an expected question. But it truly amazes me. The answers are always very nice, very simplistic. And I think it helps a lot of the audience also understand.
I think the minister,
Yes.
the minister, he answered your question. He said very simple answer to the blockchain. What does it mean? He said we have to work together. Simple as that.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Mark, you have an attempt?
Yeah, sure. Why not? So, I mean, there's two ways to look at it, right? I can be an engineer, I can be a business person.
By the way, when an expert say you have two ways to look at it, that's a problem. Go ahead.
It isn't, trust me. So the first way I would look at it is it's a shared record of events, of what happened that's distributed amongst different participants. So the best analogy for that is a newspaper. I have a certain event or a certain transaction, I publish it, I share it. Everyone sees what's going on. That is a blockchain. So this is one. The technical way to look at it is we're just taking data representing transactions, for example, or information, and we're packaging that data in a block and referencing a previous block of data, creating a chain. So you have the technical side of looking at it and the business perspective. So that's what I typically like to use.
My son actually, he's 9-year-old, asked me yesterday, where are you going tomorrow? And I told him about blockchain, and he asked me the question, so what is blockchain? I told him, well, next time you need something, don't tell your sister who's 6 to get you something. Go get it yourself. And that's actually removing the intermediary, removing the space that between you and whatever you want to do. So that's my answer to you. Any questions or comments from the audience, please? I see a hand over there. Yes, sir.
Hi, guys. My name is Sania Hansi, CEO of Medilives UK, a telemedicine organization. Now, the question I wanted to ask, because there have been a lot of repetition in terms of blockchain and cryptocurrency. From the panelists, do you think that blockchain is fundamentally different from cryptocurrency? And what's the relationship between the two?
All right, I'm going to get, again, one of the experts who wants to, in simple words, obviously.
Yeah, I do think they're fundamentally different. I think one is a system, which is a blockchain system, and then one is a type of currency that's been put onto the system. So I would not conflate the two, and I think that's why we can use it as a system and we don't necessarily need to have cryptocurrency.
Yeah, I'd just like to add to that blockchain can be looked at as a sort of data architecture in terms of what we talked about before. We assemble data into blocks, though not always, and we reference each block that came before it, creating a chain. And so that can be applied to smart contracts, it could be applied to notarizing data, so eliminating attestations, or it could be value exchange, or representing physical assets on blockchain with tokens, for example. So I think there's many different applications, and it is important not to conflate the two, as Mariam was said.
And then let me give you also the answer for a 7-year-old. The cryptocurrency, the blockchain is a system that applies to a lot of things. including finance, including energy, including education, including law, including all the services. The problem that we have with the cryptocurrency being associated with the blockchain, or mistakenly too much associated with it, because they grow up together, if you will. What has made the blockchain more popular is a cryptocurrency. And people went to cryptocurrency because it had money. There was a lot of money to be made, and people were buying and exchanging on the stock. And that's why people mistakenly confuse blockchain with, in fact, finance or cryptocurrency. Can I take the last question? Do we have time for more question? Yes, ma'am.
Hi. I'm representing private sector. I just wanted to find out if Dubai Future Foundation is supporting private sector by facilitating any kind of consortium, because I think one of the biggest problems here, I mean, I first attended this summit 2 years ago, and I went back to the office thinking that, oh, I arrived too early. So we are having a lot of issues in finding stakeholders, as you recently mentioned, connecting with them, exchanging ideas, and I wonder if you are facilitating industries.
Thanks for this question. So the program we mentioned earlier, the Blockchain Governance Accelerator, was the first time where we brought together private sector organization, government, and solution providers to have a conversation about use cases and how to implement it and the challenges. And interestingly, quite a few private sector organizations then approached us and asked us, you as a neutral party, can you help us form a consortium? Can you help us also maybe educate our senior executive team by connecting them with other private sector organizations who have already implemented blockchain solutions? So happy to have a conversation afterwards in this. Mariam, do you want to?
Very good. I wanted to thank you very much for being here and for bearing with us in explaining to you these very technical stuff. I wanted to thank my experts for being here and sharing all the knowledge and the information. And hopefully, inshallah, we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.